What makes a man, in your opinion?
Well, now hang on. I think there's a hidden assumption in that question, and I think it's an assumption that I would question. It's an assumption that there's just one definition of a man. I don't accept that at all. I've known men who are real men who had a real feminine side to them, and I've known others who have been really butch and yet have been very feminine people. So I really question whether you can just put people into a box and say, well, you're a man and you're a woman. That's been part of our problem. And it's a problem with some of the churches. Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. So I really question the assumptions in the question. But having said that, my image of a man is a person who has strength, courage, determination and an ability to get things done and to be a leader. That certainly is an aspiration of manhood that I have always embraced.
That is, in fact, something that you have achieved, a fantastic career.
It's not over.
It's not over, of course not over. Were those the guiding principles that you had?
Well, they were always the things that I was taught. I was encouraged at my schools, public schools in New South Wales, Australia, to be interested, to be engaged. I was encouraged in my later life to be a joiner. I've always been a joiner. Get into organisations. Try to make the world a better place. I think it may have come from going to Methodist churches when I was a boy. Try to make the world better and kinder. And it's what I've done in my professional life. But that's just me as a person. I've never specifically thought, well, you're doing this because you're a man. Get out there and do it. That's just not my image of myself or of maleness. Maleness is very varied.
Indeed. I'm interested in the formative years. The very early years of your childhood. What were the sort of influences from your family, your father especially, men around you? What were the sort of influences that you recall?
Well, I was lucky. I grew up in a loving family in the suburbs, the western suburbs of Sydney, in Concord. I had loving parents, young parents. My father is still alive. He's 94 and he's still driving. So people who are waiting for my state funeral have got a long wait. And I had loving siblings, 2 brothers and a sister, and we're still very close. We meet generally every Sunday night if I'm in the country. My father cooks a dinner. He's great on vegetables, veggies. We should all be eating more veggies, he says. And I think that's good advice. And even at his age of 94 and mine of 71, I still take his advice. And that's the sort of father and mother and family I had.
Do you think you would have turned out differently had you not had that kind of family?
Probably. I think you have to face the fact that you've got to be lucky in the genetics and parental stakes. If you have good intelligence and good teaching, good schools, good opportunities. There's so much in life depends on chance. And people would say to me when I was welcomed to one court after another, oh, your Honour's appointment to this court was inevitable. Well, nothing's inevitable in life. You've got to have a lot of chance and then you've got to seize your chances. And that's what I've tried to do in my career and in life. And you've got to be lucky with your family and then finding somebody, a partner, who will put up with you. And you know, there are some horrible old churches out there who don't believe in this and would have deprived me of my long relationship with my partner, Johan. Well, they've got to go and get psychotherapy and get real. And that's something that you've got to tell men. Men have got to seek, as women have got to seek, for partners, lovers, friends. And it's very important for your well-being and for your achievements in life.
Can you tell us briefly how you met Johan and how that relationship began?
My meeting with Johan was by chance. I had my first relationship was with a very handsome Spaniard. and I went with him to New Zealand, and then he decided to go on with his journey around the world. He was 24, I was 28, and he just left, and I was devastated. But 11 days later, I went to one of the relatively few gay venues in Sydney at that time, the Rex Hotel, the famous or notorious Rex. And there I met Johan. And my first immortal words to him, because of a book I was reading, was, "What did you think of von Ribbentrop?" Now, he was Dutch. I thought he was German. And he thought, why do I always meet these crazies in this place? But eventually we went in search of a coffee shop. The coffee shop had closed down, so he came back to my apartment in Kirby, and we've been together ever since, 41 long years.
But at that stage, this was very private. Nobody knew about your sexuality. Was that a problem at that stage for you?
I'm not sure people didn't know. You know, I mean, the law in particular, but Australian society, suburban Australia, is full of gossip. And people gossiped away, I'm sure. You wouldn't hear it yourself. Lawyers are great gossips, and therefore you would get people talking about me, but it wasn't sort of out there and in their face. It took a while for us to put it in their face, and actually in the end it was Johan who said, well, we owe it to the younger generation to stop this ridiculous charade, and so we did.
At what point did you tell your parents about your sexuality?
I told my father very soon after meeting Johan, and because very soon after meeting him, he came to our family home, and then subsequently we drove overland, as a lot of young Australians did in those days. Living together with a person in a combi van for a year is a real test for a relationship. Interestingly, once when we were in Sri Lanka, 4 Germans, 2 men and 2 women who were in a combi van, came, and they saw our combi van, and they said to the women in their combi van, they said, "Aber zwei Männer, 2 men, how can it be so clean?" But I don't think that was a matter of an aspect of maleness. I think that was an aspect of Dutchness. The people from the Netherlands are just so clean. Everything has to be polished and tidy. So, but anyway, that was the way we found our relationship, and it's strong as a rock. Strong as a rock.
I'm curious how your father responded to that.
He was...
I mean, did you have any reservations about telling him?
Not really. He had given me the most exquisite help in my sexuality by giving me a book, The Guide to Virile Manhood. It was by the Family Planning Association, I think, and it showed boys with penises, diagrams of penises, no photographs, of course, in those days, which were uncircumcised. And because, like most Australians of my generation, I'd been circumcised, I wondered what this curious thing was, and I'd never seen it, and I'm still a bit puzzled. But anyway, he reacted pretty well to it. My siblings reacted very well to it. They are all very intelligent, professional, lawyers, whose sons, and a nursing sister, and my mother, it was never verbalised until just before she died in 1998. But when it was verbalised, she said, "Well, what do you take me for? You've been bringing Johan here for 20 years, 30 years, every Sunday night. I didn't come down in the last shower." So sometimes you find different ways to explain things, but I know of some people whose parents have rejected them, often so-called religious people, and they really need to get over it. But in my case, my parents were very loving and supportive.
I can stay with that subject for a bit longer. What are some of the things, you've mentioned a few of the things about your father that what one could say were aspects of him being a role model for you. Are there any others on a kind of more intellectual level or a more intangible level, other than veggies?
Within the family, my father, who was a young and he was a good-looking man, he was a very energetic. He wasn't deeply into sport, and I've never been deep. None of us have been really deeply into sport, but he always had a very good rule in the family, and his rule was always forgive. If somebody says I'm sorry, then you have to accept it. He'd seen in our large extended Irish family unforgiving attitudes. It's very common for Irish people to bear grudges and to bear them from generation to generation. But my father always taught us if one of us says, well, we're sorry, then that's it, it's over. And we've always done that. And basically that's my attitude to people outside the family too. If they say they're sorry, well, it's over and you just forget about it. And bearing grudges is really a poison in your system. You've got to get over it.
We were talking before, and this brings us to that subject of, that's of course a very, Jesus-y thing. It's a very Christian attitude, but it's a humanistic attitude too. What are your sort of spiritual benchmarks? Where do you fit in?
I was sent originally to the top of the street where there was the Wesley Methodist Church, and that was they sing good hymns in the Methodist churches. Charles Wesley wrote great tunes, but then when I was a bit older I was able to cross Parramatta Road and I went to the Anglican Church, which was our denomination. So I was brought up in a Protestant Christian community, and I'm very comfortable with that. That was how I was brought up. My partner Jan says, I cannot understand how such an intelligent person can take any of this stuff seriously. All these old men in turbans writing things, they've always hated women, they've hated people of colour, and they've hated gays, and I can't understand how you have anything to do with it. Give them away, he says. Well, I don't give them away. I believe the basic lesson of spirituality that was taught by Jesus is a good lesson for life. And at least in the Anglican Church, you've got to admit, that's the one big church in the world, in the Christian denominations, that's talking about women's roles and women as priests and talking about gays in the church. The others have sort of closed down the shutters and aren't talking about it. They've got a lot of problems as a consequence.
Speaking of women, what kind of relationships do you have with women?
I think I have good relationships with women because I've felt pain of discrimination and injustice, and that therefore makes me more understanding of what it is to be a woman, or what a woman's life is in Australian society today. In comparison to many countries, of course, we've made a lot of progress in Australia, but there are still glass ceilings, there are still barriers to women's advancement. And that is something that a gay person can understand because they've suffered the same sort of attitudinal blemishes and faults in their life. What is a woman? What is a man? Well, get over it. There are a lot of varieties and diversity, but there has to be a place for all of us in creation and in our society, and that's something I share with women.
Do you have any friends that perhaps people would be surprised to have at your dinner table?
Well, we don't have very many dinner parties. I mean, we're really very, very unfriendly people, Jan and I. We just enjoy each other's company, and we still hold hands. I mean, there's something a bit weird after 41 years still doing that. But of course, gay people can't hold hands in public, so we sort of make up for that in private space. He's very interesting because he reads a lot of history. And actually, to tell you a secret, I'd rather read history than read law, but I've got to do a lot of reading of my professional work. He reads the history and then he tells me about them, and we've had a conversation. He said to me on that first night, what will we talk about, given where you're coming from, where I'm coming from, and we haven't had a problem. So as to dinner party guests, well, we have a circle of close friends. We sometimes invite them, not often enough. We often go to their places. We're party poopers, really.
I suppose my question is really about some people that you might call friends who we would be surprised to hear you call them
Well, it
friends.
depends on your level of surprise. I mean, some people would be surprised if I had the Lord Chief Justice of Northern Ireland at dinner. So you've got to get over your surprises in life. In my work on AIDS, for example, I've had quite a lot to do with sex workers. And they've given me insights that I really didn't appreciate. They've told us in meetings on AIDS, very intelligent and engaged and people, that we don't want to have a Singer sewing machine to go back to the village, and we want to get on with our work as sex workers, but we don't want to have police and others harassing us, and we don't want to have people arresting us because we've got condoms on, which are essential to protect us. So it gives you a different insight into life, and largely I think through my sexuality, and specifically through the AIDS epidemic and my work in relation to the AIDS epidemic, I've met a lot of interesting people, injecting drug users, men who have sex with men. All the vulnerable groups are a bit on the outside, and that's something I suppose most judges don't meet, but I've met them, and they're some of the most engaging, intelligent and beautiful people I've met.
You've had and still have a wonderful career and tremendous contributions to public life. And you've had a wonderful family life. You know, you grew up in a loving family. In all of that, though, I'm sure there must have been difficulties and challenges.
Yes, there have been difficulties and challenges. They largely relate to my sexuality, because I had a very good brain and I had very good education and I had very good chances in my professional life. But there was a period where in Australia you had to play the game don't ask, don't tell. And that meant you had to sort of keep things a big dark secret, including for a time from the people you love most dearly in your blood family. But even that, in my case, we sort of got over, and I was very involved in the AIDS epidemic before we made our public announcement about our sexuality, and that was sort of code language, and everybody knew. And I thought, well, if you're going to gossip about me, I'll give you something to gossip about. But there were painful times growing up as a young person and being told that you're weird or that you're a puff, and that you're outside the kingdom of God. That is not an easy journey, and I was a pretty robust type, and I had lots of supports. Now, many people are not robust and they don't have lots of supports, so that's why I wanted to send a signal. I'm here to support you, and gay people are not just hairdressers and actresses. They're people in every walk of life, up to the level of a Prime Minister, and they're garbage collectors, and they're all ranges of life. Get over it. It's like being left-handed. Would you punish people for being left-handed? They tried to make my brother Donald, who was left-handed, write with his right hand, and my mum went up to the school and said, "Don't you dare." Well, that was the attitude of my parents too about sexuality.
You said you were pretty robust. How do you mean that? Can you give us an idea of how a young Michael Kirby dealt with some of those issues?
Well, I never had a walker. You know, a lot of gay people sort of pretend. I wasn't completely in your face, but I never sort of pretended that I was actually a straight person. It's difficult to do that in the suburbs of Sydney. If you're living in a suburb and you're living there, and we've lived in our place for about 35 years, then people will draw inferences. And it's good that they draw inferences, but it's also good that it's out on the table. And so now we go to functions with the Queen, with the Governor-General, with the Prime Minister, and it's good for them as well as good for us. And we're pretty tough cookies. We've had to be. We've been tested in the furnace, and we've come through.
What about when you were 13, 14, 15?
Well, that was hard, but I never felt I was weird. See, I was a clever little boy, and about the time I was 13 or 14, the papers were full of the Kinsey reports. Dr. Kinsey in Indiana in the United States, a very unlikely place, he'd been the big expert on bees, and suddenly he decided to be the big expert on human sex. And so he started to reveal that there's about 10% of human beings who have sexual inclination to their own sex. So there's a much bigger number who have engagement with their own sex, about 30% in their life, and there's about 4% of men who are exclusive. And I just realised, well, I'm one of that 4%, so I've just got to get over it and get over live my life and make the best of it. And I never really felt wicked or evil or nasty, but sadly that is what a lot of religions still go round saying. And in the age of AIDS, that's a really bad message, because it humiliates people, causes stigma, and puts them outside the messages that protect them and protect society.
So you were really kind of a tough kid in that
Yes,
respect, emotionally and spiritually.
I wasn't out there in the back blocks or behind the school fence bashing people up. But
internally?
I was pretty strong. And I put that down to my intelligence, my reading, my teachers, who were wonderful teachers, wonderful values, secular values in public schools in Australia, and also my loving parents and siblings. All of this was sort of, I never thought I was second class, but I know that a lot of people, probably the most young gay people, especially if they're in rural and regional areas, they often feel that they have no supports. And that's essentially why Johan and I took our step. We're a support, we're there for you, and there's lots of other people, leaders of the professions, who are there for you.
I'm interested in this only because it seems to me that you, while you recognised, and you were made to recognise by some people at that age, that you were different, it didn't bother you that you were different because you had other things to shore you up.
Yes, I think the fact that I was being very successful at school, that sort of made me feel good. And in fact, when I was at North Strathfield Public School and I did well, which I was always striving to do, they would put a little crown on my book at that time. And I would take that home and I would say to my mother, I came first, and once I said I came second. That was a very bad look, but they weren't oppressive. They didn't sort of hound me to come first, but they were very supportive. But not everybody has these chances, genetic and familial, in life. And so we've got to realise that just as a man is a man, well, there are a lot of men. My brother was sometimes mistaken, because he's a bit softer than I am, for being gay. And he would always have to say to people, I'm not gay, I like boys with tits. So you can't tell on their face. If people saw me, they would say, oh, well, that's a really good, strong, straight man. Well, get over it. I'm a gay, poof, and you've got to face that fact.
What about now, looking back on your life? I mean, are there some people that you continue to admire and respect? What sort of people are they?
Well, they're people who stand up. I admire, for example, Martin Luther, who stood up against the whole world. There was a debate recently as to who was the most important figure of the last millennium. And it was a debate whether it was Martin Luther, who took on the whole of the Catholic Church, or was it Gutenberg, who invented the printing press. Well, they were two great men, and they were both Germans, and they stood up. And Luther wasn't unflawed, because he was also a bit anti-Semitic, which was a big problem, and we came to see that in the events of the Holocaust. But he stood up for the rights of conscience and truth as he saw it, and that was always a model before me. And there have been plenty of models. It's strange that when you ask who are the people who I look up as leaders, they would be people like Bishop Spong, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, people who have stood up and spoken out, straight men who have spoken out for gay people in the Christian church. And we need people who will do that, because there are all sorts of pressures to bite your tongue and to be silent. Well, I'm for speaking up and standing up and speaking out and supporting the vulnerable and helping them. Everyone has a right. Human rights are not just for the gifted few, they're for everyone.
Let me ask you about the things that, we all have in our lives, disappointments of some kind. How do you deal with disappointments? I mean, significant ones.
Yes, well, I mean, death, for example, is a terrible blow, and I really never felt the pain of death until my grandmother died, and then my mother died, and that is a terrible burden for every human being to carry, and to be contemplating it and knowing it is coming and knowing you are powerless is almost unendurable, and you need a lot of love and support at such a time. How do you cope? Well, you just need to support each other, and in a sense, it's the unarguability of death that makes it acceptable, because you go through that phase of the valley you walk through is a valley that comes ultimately to acceptance, and so that's how I coped with that problem. Lovers who walked out, well, that Spaniard walked out on me, you know. I still send him emails, we're still in touch, and he sends me messages saying, you didn't mourn for long enough, you only mourned for 11 days. And it is true, I was very lucky in that respect. So how did I get over it? Well, I went out there and I started looking again, and I found, and I was very lucky. And people who would deprive another human being of a loving partnership of 41 years, well, they really are cruel. They're either ignorant or cruel. I'm willing to accept they might be ignorant, but they've got to know more gay people to realise that that is a really stupid position to take.
Is there anything in your life that you would have done differently if you could do it again? Short of regrets, let's not talk about regrets.
Well, maybe I would have been more open and out, as they say, earlier in my life. I mean, I wasn't ever really secretive in the sense that I didn't have maskings to prevent people knowing, but I wasn't in your face. If I'd been in your face, there is a question as to whether I would ever have been appointed a judge. Would I have been appointed to the Court of Appeal? Would I have been appointed to the Law Reform Commission? Would I have been appointed to the High Court back in '96 when I was appointed? In a sense, I played along with society's game. But that game's over now, and I hope that what has happened in my life will make it easier for the next generation. Don't think that all prejudice against gay people is finished. It's not. Surveys have shown we've got better in Australia over racism than we have over homophobia. And in a way, talking to you and speaking on this program and trying to be honest and in your face is part of the therapy that society needs to counteract the therapy that's given to it by so-called religious people.
So, if I can put it sort of crudely, what advice would you give to young men who are, you know, feeling the pressure of A, not knowing their sexuality, and B, feeling that they have to do something about it and they don't know what to do, they're afraid?
Well, I'd give them the advice to do what I did when I was in that situation. I didn't know of any gay venues. I mean, we're talking now about the ancient times. This is really back in the time of the Ark. I'm a bit of a dinosaur. But I then raised it with somebody who had been a client of mine who was being prosecuted for breaching censorship laws, and I'd acted for him for the Council for Civil Liberties, and so I sort of raised it with him because I knew he was a sort of person on the fringes of society and he would know, and so he introduced me, and then this other gay guy took me to a hotel, and he took me to the Rex Hotel, which very soon afterwards I met through that, I met Demofilo, the Spaniard, and then I met Johan. I was a big loss to the gay community and the gay venues because I was such a good catch. I was snaffled up very quickly, and then I just became a sort of homebody, holding hands and eating meals, and boring, really boring.
So you suggest networking amongst, if you can, for these young men, they should find people of like mind.
Yes, and if they're gay, they'll soon find it. If they're bisexual, they'll find it. I mean, there's quite a few people who are bisexual in society, as Kinsey disclosed years ago. And we've got to get rid of the patriarchy and the attempt to force people into a box that they can't be themselves and explore themselves, explore their inner soul and their being. I mean, this is not a dress rehearsal, as they say. This is the real thing, and we only have a limited time, and we should seek love. That's the most important thing, in my opinion. The most important word is love. The greatest of these is love. And love includes sexual love and sexual expression. And we shouldn't be embarrassed to talk about it. It's a reality, and therefore it's part of our lives. And people should be quite determined to explore that aspect of their personality.
Thank you very much.